And welcome to the Distributed Republic webcast. It's great to have you all here today. Really excited to have you join us for this very exciting episode. For those of you who haven't joined us before, hi, I'm Jamie Bykov-Brett. This is where we essentially explore the impact of decentralization, Web3, the Metaverse, and AI on our social, economic, and political systems. Our mission is to ensure that the communities that can benefit the most from the inception of new technologies have access to the resources, education, and expertise to thrive in a digital world. We are going to do our best to minimize jargon, keep our answers short, make sure they're easy to understand. But if you are having any trouble at all and you're like, you know what, I haven't heard that term before, or that's a new one to me, we do have some resource guides created by our friends at Cybergear. So if you're looking for Web3 or AI, you can go to our distributedrepublic.xyz, go to documents and infographics, and you'll see the resource guides there. As always, please feel free to add your questions in the comments. We love them. They're really useful. And we'll do our best to answer any questions that people have as we go through the episode. Today's episode is on integrating digital innovation into your brand strategy. I am joined by the fantastic, the wonderful, the amazing Lauren Kacher, who is once again looking at with those amazing AR earrings to be able to kind of show off. Fantastic. Lauren, I'd like you to do a bit of an introduction to yourself and what you do.
Hello again. I think this is maybe our third time, our third session.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe I can keep myself going a little bit. But yeah, great to be back. Thanks for having me. Yeah, the earrings, they just will continue to make appearances until I think the computer breaks. They're always on. It's like, yeah. So yeah, about me, I'm Lauren. I am I would say, digital fashion expert for the past 5 years, since COVID. And yeah, we've been figuring out this landscape together for a while now. And yeah, so I have a couple of current roles right now. I work with fashion studios and brands to help them integrate technology into their processes, to basically help them become more sustainable, more socially inclusive, and more impactful in the industry. So yeah.
That is fantastic. I think one of the really useful aspects of this conversation, and it was actually something that you told me that I've then made a whole bunch of content about, which was that your ideal client is someone who's 2 steps behind where you currently are. And that's why I feel like we're in a very good position to be able to talk about brand strategy. I've been on a branding journey this year with people that I've been working with to develop my brand. To be able to kind of really start to understand that brand identity process, come up with branding guidelines, all of that kind of stuff. And we've gone through a branding journey together as well. So it's really useful to kind of get your perspectives on it. For those of you who haven't met me before, hi, I'm Jamie Bykov-Brett. I'm a human-centric innovator. I support organizations with things like implementing AI and automation, as well as developing immersive technologies and being able to kind of put that all together in a bundle to support businesses to be able to move forward and make themselves appear a lot bigger when there might only be a few of you. So this is going to be really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to your insights on this, Lauren. First question, what does integrating digital innovation into brand identity truly mean, and why is it becoming increasingly important?
Yeah, so I guess at this point, like, digital innovation, it has a large scope. Like, we've had like a couple of versions of the internet, and so where we are now is quite a lot more advanced, I think, than we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But like, kind of the term itself and like overall digital innovation, I would say, it means blending technology with like a recognizable identity and story into like a modern and cohesive narrative. And I think why it's become so important, especially post-COVID, is that like expectations of consumers and those who are like interfacing with your brand have been demanding like more personalized interaction, more sustainable for sure. Like in Europe, there's a lot of like emerging legislation that like makes it so sustainability is definitely no longer a nice to have. It's like a must have. And like, how do we have like increasingly immersive experiences with our brands? Because I think we've seen like the side of technology creating a lot of noise. And so now I think in this new version of where we are with Web3 and all these new emerging technologies, it's like, how do you make something feel more intimate and like have a more personalized connection through interfacing with your brand, but in a way that's so global and can still connect with who you're trying to reach?
I think there's some really amazing points there, and I particularly like when we're talking about like the next evolution of the internet, because that's what we are talking about a lot of the time, is really the future of the internet and e-commerce and how those things all interact with each other. I particularly to give people an example of this. So search engine optimization, I think, is always a fantastic example of how digital innovation is shaping this landscape. So it used to be your search engine optimization was no search engine at all. You had your yellow pages, and your yellow pages were AAA. Everybody named their business AAA because they were the people that were the top of the yellow pages. Then your internet comes along, you get Google, you get your search engine optimization, and then people start to go, well, instead of giving my my Chinese takeaway a really cool name, what I'm going to do is call it Chinese takeaway, because then when people do a search, their search engine optimization is going to go Chinese takeaway in my local area. That's what I'm going to search for. Now we're really looking at the next evolution of search engine optimization because of AI and how that changes the landscape. And we're not really sure what's going to take its place. But with AI being able to distinguish context better, with being able to read into details more frequently, and also potentially not using search engines at all, being able to ask your questions, just ChatGPT are coming up with a product at the moment, which is just AI search engine where you don't go to the pages, you just get the answers. And that's changing the landscape again. So we can see how these evolutions of how people interact with content and how people find content has changed. And that's changed how brands have had to identify themselves. And that's going to obviously impact how people recognize you, how people find you, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think you're saying about some of the aspects around the social aspect and the evolution of that, but there's also evolutions around the security of that as well. How people can protect their brands online and how people participate online is always changing, always evolving, from marketing all the way down to what does it take to go and find a brand that you care about and what their meaning is and their sustainability goals and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I like how you described like the phone book thing. That was a good metaphor. And I guess if we're breaking out into the three, I would say like search was like the primary function of the first wave, right? The second was definitely social, I think, like with the rise of social networks. We're not just like, reading things, like now we're interacting, sharing, commenting. And now I call it like more smart, like it's like the smart version of the internet, that things become more customized, things become, like you're not just like communicating with other humans, like now there's also AI and like all these other technologies that ideally improve the experience. And like you said, the security and all that.
Yeah, and that will be a very interesting space to be able to be in, because when we are looking at things like AI integration into the internet was not designed for this level of AI content. It was designed for people to share with people. Not that that's ever kind of stopped anything developing in any particular way. However, when we do look at our next evolution of the internet, we might end up with, I think, separate types of internet. You'll have an internet that has your AI content, that is all that searchable stuff, but probably another side of an internet that is backed by blockchain, that is secured in that particular way, in order to be able to go, well, actually, am I authentically connecting with a person? And I can use blockchain as a verification process to make sure that, is this content human generated or is this content AI generated? Because I think that participation from a social channel perspective, that participation from a security perspective, is going to make it really different for how we participate online. And we're kind of in a late stage social media at the moment, where people are trying to bring that authenticity, they're trying to bring funny, they're trying to bring engagement, but people are so washed with it all that it's just no longer hitting the mark in the way that it used to. So it'll be really interesting to see some of those developments and how that's going to change. We'd like to have all the answers for you, and if we did, then we'd be making a lot more money than we are.
Yeah, I'll start charging.
Yeah, definitely. If I had the answers, I would definitely think about my rates. But what we can say is we can start to see some of the directions and start to prepare brands for this changing digital landscape, largely motivated by the developments in digital technology. Which leads me on to my next question. How can brands ensure that digital identity is consistent with their traditional brand values and messaging?
Yeah, and so this was something that we had like done a little exercise around of like how to find your digital identity and your core identity. And like you mentioned at the start, like you've been doing a lot around this. So I'd say like digital is like used to amplify, like it's used to enhance. It's not necessarily like the story, right? I think I said this last time. So being really clear on like what is your DNA and like what is your story. And so like you mentioned like brand guidelines. So that's like also goes kind of like a visual graphic, overarching kind of like brand guidelines. And then also there's like, if I'm speaking about fashion, then it would be describing like what are the commonalities like within the products, like how do you make sure you get recognized, like we said, in all this noise. So I think like having a really clear, concise, authentic, aligned brand identity is like very important and something to definitely reevaluate. And then when you now add like this digital layer, it's kind of making sure, I think, that it's aligned across all like these new platforms, but then also because like, and we've talked about this with like the meta reality formula, it's like each space has like pros and like cons. There's like benefits, right, of working in like a totally virtual space. Like there's a lot more maybe fantasy, creativity, less restriction versus like something in a physical space maybe is like a little more toned down or sustainably focused. So yeah, I think there's two sides, like understand, align who you are, and that really also goes in hand with knowing who you're speaking to. And then how do you take that, communicate it across these new spaces, but then in a way that like is using that technology to the best of its abilities.
I think from the exercise that we went through together, where we were looking at particularly the visual brand guidelines that we're coming up with, I think one of the big things that I took away from that was the whole idea of these kind of codexes of your brand and how it shows up and how that relates to visual. Could you talk through a little bit about that? Because I think it's a really powerful aspect of what I've done when it comes to visual branding with you.
Yeah, and it's actually an approach we do as designers for, at least that I learned, it was like an accessory and fashion designer. And so there's different approaches kind of based on probably the function. And so, Xan is here. And so like Jamie, I think like when you did like your brand guidelines with like more colors, typography, that's one way to do it and like also necessary. And what we did is more like thematic. It's more about kind of like overarching themes that then help you to have like these codes when you make products, when you make content. And so like what we did and what I love to do with clients is like go really deep into like their background, their history, because I think we aren't quite aware of like how much like our previous experiences make our identity. And so what we did was basically like, you gave me, I think, a ton of examples, which was really fun, like to hear like your history, your past, like what was super significant in your life. And then from there, we basically started to like pull out themes and then assemble them into kind of like 6, I think, like main pillars that then become an additional tool that you can use with like your graphic identity or how you explain, like you say, like human-centric innovator, right? So for me, I'm like more visual on product. So then I need those codes in order to know how to design something that's like aligned with the brand. So yeah, that's like, if that explains it enough.
Definitely. One of the aspects that I know, it was slightly aside from what we did, but it was something that I took away and thought, you know what, that works for me. I quite like the way of it, is finding ways of particularly using colors and stuff that you use frequently. And the color that I've gone for, it's actually the little blue that's in the corner by by Catherine's comment at the moment, is actually just one that I pulled from my eyes. I was like, right, that's the hex code for that. I can always have that identity between the color my color of my eyes that are going on. So every time I'm doing posts, there's like a little connection between everything that's going on. And it's just those things that people start to associate and build that identity with. And yeah, it was definitely a very useful exercise. So I recommend anyone who's looking at their visual branding, definitely reach out to Lauren, because it's a deep exercise. Don't get me wrong. You're going to need a recovery afternoon for it. But it was a very worthwhile one as well. So I think that leads really nicely onto this question, which is, what are the key components of digitally innovative brand identity?
Do you want to go first? Because you've had a lot of experience with this recently.
Yeah, sure. I can go for this. So I think when it comes to digital innovation, one of the key aspects that we have to look at, and I might have said this on different occasions, but it's definitely the biggest problem that I come up with, is people come up to you and go, we want to do something with AI. We want to do something with the metaverse. We want to do something with AI. I'm like, great. What do you want to do with AI? And they're like, don't know, have no idea, just heard about it. And they start with the technology and the innovation rather than the messaging and the experience that they're trying to enhance. These tools are just tools. They are not the finished product. If you want to use them meaningfully, you have to think about what kind of experience are we trying to facilitate. And this is what I love about breaking it down from like that meta-reality perspective into those different kinds of experiences, is because we want to be able to think about, how do we want this person to feel? Why is this technology enhancing this experience? And I think that for me is the biggest key component. It doesn't matter whether you're using AI, Metaverse, XR, whatever it might be. How does this make your experience better? If we're using AI and you've got a bot on your website that has all the information that they might need, so someone doesn't have to trawl through page and page and page, because the bot's trained on your website, so it means that they can get to the answers quicker. Fantastic. That's improved the user experience. It's available on demand, anytime, any device, anywhere. Well, that's going to be easier than having somebody sitting behind a computer waiting to reply to messages. Obviously, a lot easier to be able to train. But you don't start off with the AI. You start off with, what's the experience we're trying to do? How can we enhance what we want to do or what we already do with AI? Same thing can go for a website. Great, we want to do something in the metaverse. Well, you could design a 3D showroom of your workplace and have kind of social interactions within those spaces. But how is that an enhancement of your current website? You know, what experiences are you going to incorporate into that makes this a worthwhile addition? And I think for me, starting off with meaning is always the most important part. What makes this meaningful? Then we'll decide how the technology can do it. And you don't need to know how all the technologies work. If we go back to that initial sentiment of, this is the evolution of the internet and e-commerce, don't worry about all of the component parts all the time. Just think about, how are people going to participate in digital spaces in the next 2, 3, 4 years? And then we can start to think about what the technologies are that are going to be the best solution. So that's my perspective on the key components. But what about you?
Yeah. Right. Like, what's the thing behind the thing? Like, what are we actually getting at? Which is, I think, quite hard to actually like discern, which is interesting. It's like we're always saying something behind what we're actually saying. And so like, that's also something I've been learning. I've been doing like this business accelerator. So like, I'm a designer, I'm trained as this, like they don't spend a lot of time on business in my previous experience. So like, I really want to learn more about this. And so it's like, how do you really speak to where people are now? Right. And like you mentioned before, like, who, like maybe potential audience is like, who are you like 5 years ago? How do you speak to them? And I think, yeah, just like making it really real and applicable while still like having that overarching vision of where you want to go, but like addressing it to the now, I think is like really something I've been learning. And then you mentioned like, yeah, finding that meaning and like, what's the goal? And so when I started ALTERRAGE, so that was back in 2019, and ALTERRAGE is a like fully Web3 fashion label, and we just use it as an experiment to like test all these technologies, but aligned with like an overall mission of how do you connect fashion with activism. And so like for our first year, the theme was e-waste. So we created like a fashion film that was about it. We created like these different kinds of products that were totally digital. And so it was really like that. Yeah, how do we explore around like your purpose and intention? And I think something that has always driven me is like a value-driven approach. It's just like it comes quite naturally to me. But I kind of broke it out into like 5 values that I think like brands in like a future space and like starting from now, it's really important to have like that iconic, recognizable identity. You have that strong DNA. You are becoming digitally dynamic. So like, especially in like the physical space, we have a lot of issues, problems, like when people are just in the physical, it's slow, it's causes, right? I think I already said waste, but it's hard to be agile and like in a world where everything is changing all the time, especially with right all those like increased technologies that we have to deal with and information overload all the time. So iconic identity, digitally dynamic, also sustainably connected. So right, I mentioned like there's these new legislations, so it's really important to know like where are your products made and communicate that to your consumers, since that is like very much an expectation moving forward. And then the last 2 I add in, I think we'll just continually grow. I can kind of sense it, but like socially inclusive, like there's all these, you know, social movements that have been on the rise, you know, like from Me Too to like what we just saw at the Olympics. It's like all about inclusivity. It's all about diversity, which is like really promising to see. And then the last would be, I would say, like impactful globally. So it's like, how do you even take it a step further and start to integrate like causes around like sustainable development goals or activism, kind of like what my goal really was with ALTERRAGE. So yeah, I think like having those 5 in place, you'll be very successful moving forward.
And I think a big aspect of that as well is authentically having those 5 in place. I think if you're one of those brands and you go, you know what, this actually isn't our objective. This, you know, we're not actually trying to achieve these goals in any meaningful way, then don't tell people you're doing it, because people, you will get caught out. There is enough information out there that the worst thing than not participating is trying to participate, but in a way that isn't authentic. And that I think is really damaging to a lot of digital identity out there, is you can be found out and you will be found out, and that will not disappear very quickly. And you might have to rethink about how you go about that approaches. So authenticity, I think, is the name of the game. And also when it comes to digital identity, brand identity, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned is, cool, we can utilize AI, we can utilize these virtual spaces, but if it doesn't have an authentic cause behind it, people still won't buy it. And there's lots of different types of causes that you can have, but do the ones that are actually meaningful to you as an organization or you as an individual, because there's no point participating in everything. People won't buy it anyway. So I think that's a definite good place to start and a green flag for any digital identity process.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like, that's the thing I think humans are very good at. I don't know about if AI, how well they can flag something that's inauthentic, but yeah, like we have a very good like bullshit detector. I think it comes from tribalism and like, yeah, something about the human brain of like wanting to be in a group and like, yeah, there's like this trigger that happens like when we see something that's inauthentic and it just kind of like feels wrong. And yeah, has definitely backfired on like a lot of brands like when doing that. So right, it's important to know like your values and like and do something that is really aligned with like who you are, which is like why we did that exercise. Because right, to then like take on something that somebody else's or yeah, do something that's not aligned, it's like results in all the things that you just said of like people can tell, and then they'll feel, I think, less connected, right? It's like maybe lowers trust and connection.
Definitely. And ironically, we might feel more disconnected from technology. I think that's definitely been the case over the last few years. Is technology hasn't felt like it's connected us. It's felt like it's been a bit of a point of disconnection. But people are craving connection. They are craving these meaningful interactions. They're craving this authenticity. And I think that's changed a lot over the last 10 years, particularly maybe before the pandemic. It was a little bit more showmanship online, whereas I think the pandemic has really realigned how people want to participate in digital spaces and what it means to participate in digital spaces, which I think leads nicely onto this, which is how are emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, AR, and VR reshaping brand identity?
Yeah, and so how I broke out like those values stack. I'm currently in the process of launching a studio accelerator to help fashion brands integrate technology, and I break it out kind of aligned with like that process of these values. So like an example would be for like identity, we talk about AI, like the opportunities of like creating with it, but then also how do you safeguard your identity, your IP? Because that's like another whole discussion of what will happen. Like when all these images are trained on your work, like it becomes like a Pinterest kind of situation. Like when we started to use Pinterest for research, everything started to look the same. So it's like, how do you protect your IP in this emerging world where everyone's now using AI to create? And then when it's about like digital, obviously, like we go more about like the 3D. And so how do you use like 3D rendering, visualization technology strategies to see things more quickly, easier, make changes faster. And so that's just like more within like the brand. And then like for sustainably connected, we get more into blockchain. And like you mentioned, right, it's kind of like this verification process, the provenance of authenticity. So how do you use that in relation to your products or your identity? And then for the last two, for social, we explore like community, DAOs, NFT. Like there's a really, I think, interesting concept that it does feel new. Like maybe like we had like the Kickstarter movement and like all of like kind of these crowdfunding, but it feels like a new level of crowdfunding where it's around these like micro communities, which I think is what we've lost like in the social media boom, is like this really like actual connection with a group who share your values. So that's really interesting to explore around like how do you use an NFT to curate like a group of collectors that can really strengthen your brand and like get that really meaningful two-way communication. And then the last that we talk about is like when we talk about impact across spaces, the meta reality formula across right the physical, the augmented, and the digital. So how do you use XR, VR, virtual spaces to bring new experiences to your products and utility to your digital products? So that's how I explain and like kind of break out the technology by those values and like by how brands like already work.
Some great points. I'm probably going to work my way backwards through the ones that you said there. So I'm going to start with that whole idea of followers as well. Yeah, it's right. We have lost a lot of that community bit, and actually, follower count used to be a very meaningful aspect of social participation, but now it is significantly lost its value. People want those communities of like-minded, people who care about the same thing, and it doesn't matter if it's a small community or a big community. And in fact, that gated community has become a lot more prestigious than having a large follower account. People want to be able to access those people that are sharing, connecting online through digital spaces. So that's one of the massive major shifts that we've seen from a participation perspective. From an immersive perspective, I always go to these two statistics, which I think is going to show how the internet's evolving and why it's going to be such a change when basically digital steps out from how we participate at the moment, which is through a monitor. I'm looking at the digital world and I'm looking at you through a screen and being able to go, right, I can see my digital space in front of me. But when it becomes fully immersive, you are then participating in those digital spaces. And the effect of that is it's engaged with for 36% longer than 2D technology, and it has a 26% higher emotional reaction than 2D technology. So you can see from a brand perspective why it's so valuable to get involved with these technologies, and why an organization like Facebook, like Meta, has probably gone, you know what, we're going to invest in these technologies, because if your model is based on the attention model, having something that gives you those kind of those boosts in statistics is going to be something that you're going to want to be a part of. And I think this is where lots of brands are starting to look at it. there's negative sides of that completely, like, I'm not trying to rule this out, but I will kind of touch on some of the positive aspects of, you know, training, facilitation, getting your message across, being able to do those things with more time, more emotional energy. When we're thinking about websites being engaged with, you know, we measure it in milliseconds. How long do we have to capture someone's space in that time, versus immersive technologies where we can keep people there for a lot longer and communicate our message with a lot more nuance? That could be an amazing aspect of it as well. And on the AI aspect of it, there are just a couple of points that I wanted to kind of play off there, which is one of my biggest concerns from an AI perspective, particularly centralized AI, and one of the things that people need to be aware of when it comes to digital identity. It can be really useful for your digital identity, because it perpetuates your average of whatever it is. So if you give your AI a brand strategy, it is going to be able to clearly, continuously make that message in line with your brand identity, because essentially AI is an average. That's the way that it works. It takes your statement, it tokenizes it, the magic happens, it gets retokenized, and then it comes out as a statement. Oh, my light's gone off. That's okay. So when that happens, it's just gone really dark all of a sudden. That's the AI kicking
It's
in.
still
So
the AI is reacting to what you say. It's like, shh.
But actually, yeah, one of my other devices just started flashing next to me really strangely. So there you go. We're learning something.
We're already being controlled.
Yeah, something's happening. So what we're seeing is it's averaging out. Essentially, it's that average sentiment, which means it perpetuates societal norms and values. And I think we have to be really careful with AI, because a really good example of this is if you asked an AI to give you a list of philosophers over the last 100 years, it would probably give you a list of white Western men, because the material that it's trained on would average out and go, well, these must be the philosophers because I've got more information on these kind of people and this kind of participation, which means it's perpetuating that societal norm. And we have to think about how we can essentially tweak AI and play with AI to get the answers we want. If we changed it to, hey, I want a list of diverse philosophers over the last 100 years, then you'll start to get that more averaging out and some of that mitigating against the own biases that we can see perpetuated in AI. And I think organizations and brands need to be very careful of that, because if you're always going through the middle of the row and you're always going on the average, you're probably going to get caught up in those same biases and perpetuating that as well, which doesn't help if you are trying to be able to expand that authenticity and expand what participation means and reach new audiences. So definitely something that people need to be prepared of when they're using these emerging technologies. Next question. What impact does the integration of digital tools have on the consumer perception of a brand?
I guess it depends on the brand, probably, and depends on the tools. But I think, right, there's like there's a risk like to trying something new, to experimenting with like tools. Like, so the most recent thing I can think of was like Mango. They launched an AI campaign where I'm pretty sure like everything was AI, like including the models. And so it was, I think, one of the first like campaigns I've seen totally AI by such a big brand. And so like they were right quite early to try it. And I think there was like some backlash, but then overall it does like lift up the entire kind of ecosystem and industry as like we're experimenting and like figuring out how to make it have a really interesting application. So then I guess, right, if you're using technology, the perception of the consumer maybe is like initially like intrigued, like that there is something like so new, and making sure that it is aligned with like your identity, because that's like definitely what they'll be looking for, is like, is the thing you just launched like aligned with your messaging and like what we've been hearing from you in the past. But I'd say like the risk is definitely worth the reward as far as like increased engagement, press, and like just the ability to now have that knowledge of like, how do you use these technologies in your internal processes to streamline, to cut costs, and to I think just have like a more open mindset to change, which is obviously challenging, especially in like large organizations.
Definitely. In fact, one of the technologies that often gets paired with AI, but actually should have its own considerations as part of what we're discussing, is automation generally. Digital automation for businesses can be such a game changer. And automation is essentially the ability of machines, computers, digital tools to be able to do things via triggers and therefore being able to kind of, once again, perpetuate certain actions in particular ways. And these things would normally have involved human intervention to be able to do it. And one of the most meaningful aspects of digital tools that I've had from my business perspective is being able to use automation and AI to be able to run my business pages. So I always make sure when it comes to my voice and communicating on like LinkedIn and my social channels that represent me, that comes from a different place. But when it comes to being able to go through, hey, I've put a blog on the website, I don't want to just have to have created that blog once and wait for it, hope that it has a shining moment and I share it once and then people maybe read it, maybe it gets some kind of relevance, maybe it picks up, or maybe it has absolutely no impact at all. So now what I utilize is automation to be able to go, great, when that blog is posted, I want it to be able to add it to a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is going to write an AI caption for it. What that's going to do is it's going to go into a list of all the blog posts that are there. And every week we're going to post one of those blog posts. So it means that if I've got, 12, 13, 14 blog posts in there, then it's going to take 3 or 4 months before it comes up. But it means it's going to be relevant again. And I don't have to worry about when I'm posting it, the effort that it takes to be able to do that. I know that blog post could have a second chance, might resonate with someone 6 months down the line or have a different impact than it had 6 months prior to it. And being able to do things like that with content means that you're able to make sure that digital identity and the effort you put into cultivating that digital identity can go that little bit further as well, because you're going to make sure through automation that those messages, that content is more to the forefront of people's minds. And I think that I am always worried about consumer perception of that. If I come to my business pages, do people care that it's not manned by a human being? How far are we along on our AI journey to be able to trust it as well? I do these things for some of these posts without review because I've worked so hard on building the AI systems behind it that I know I'm going to get a consistent result every time. I make sure that the confines that it can work in are really narrow, and therefore I'm confident of it being able to reflect in the right way. But it is obviously a risk there as well. However, being a small enterprise and having all of these business pages run without having to have human intervention is a pretty substantial aspect for any social entrepreneur, for anyone who's trying to get their message out there, to not have to be having to shout from the rooftops all the time, but can use AI and automation to be able to help with that as well.
Yeah, and what you've done around automation is like another level. Like when you showed me like little snapshots, I'm like, I want that. Like there's no question. So then like for you, question, like what do you think like your client or just like a brand would need to have in place in order to integrate automation? Like, so for me, I've been spending like over like the past 3 years, like really figuring out like what is like my process as far as like even working as a consultant, as doing content. So it seems like knowing your process is really important, like before you can really automate it. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I would say there is 3 questions that I always ask clients when it comes to how we're going to utilize AI and automation, or whether the right tools are there. The first one is the task repetitive? At the moment, a lot of the automations that are on my social pages are triggered on different days of the week. I know that every Thursday I want one of the blog posts to be able to go out, so that I can time that. I can make sure that it works consistently, and that being the trigger. Then I've got the process of being able to go, well, I want to be able to make sure that every time a blog post is put, it populates this spreadsheet. It's got the caption, it's got the link, everything like that. So we were always looking at what's those repetitive tasks that we could do or we want to do, but we're probably not doing at the moment. So is the task repetitive is the first one. The second one is, does it involve a lot of text? This is prime for where AI is at the moment. And this works really well because you can utilize so many language models, and for near enough nothing. If you're looking at the cost of inquiry for ChatGPT, it used to be 1/10 of a cent per inquiry for like 1,000 tokens. It's even less than that now. It's so cheap, it's almost free. So if you're using APIs and building it into your automation processes, we can do a lot with text very easily, very quickly, almost instantaneously for such a low cost. So getting to be able to write captions and things like that, where we give it a very narrow window to work in, and we train it on things like your brand strategy, means that we get really good, consistent results from it. And the third thing is it about at the level that you could get an intern to do it? Which is where it's kind of ironic. I would think lots of social places do probably have their interns running the social media accounts. And I think that that's a really good understanding of, what are some of the levels that we're working at with AI. Is if it's an entry-level job, if you could teach someone who is new to the organization, who doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience on how to be able to do these things and doesn't need a lot of experience to be able to do it, then the likelihood is we can work with AI and automation to produce a similar effect. Obviously, there are consequences to that. And one of the reasons that I'm always training up young people on how to use AI and automation is because those entry-level roles are going to be hard sought after, and they're going to be hard to keep. And therefore, by teaching young people how to use it, I hope that we can teach them how to leverage these tools and to be beneficial within that workspace. Because I think the level of skill that's going to be required for an entry-level job is going to rise quite significantly.
Yeah, like even when in fashion, it's like especially challenging. Like you look on like fashionjobs.com, which is just like one of the websites to look for roles. And I think the last time I looked, there was 150 internship positions available, which are most unpaid. And then there's maybe like 5 key roles. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes. And so especially like when it's visual, when it's like more designing products, like how that will start to change, the kind of roles that are opening up.
I agree. So we're going to do this as our last question, but if anyone has any comments or any questions they'd like to add, I'd put them in now and we'll do our best to answer them at the end there. So last question, what steps should a brand take to begin integrating digital innovation into its identity?
I think you gave like those nice 3 steps as far as like the automation side. But I think like it starts, and we've discussed this before, with just like an understanding holistically of the brand. And that's something that I do at the start of like before integrating any innovation or strategy or implementation, is like that holistic kind of diagnostic. So I call it like product value mapping. So there's a point like at the start of every collection in a brand where you need alignment, and you kind of receive this brief from marketing, from design, from development. And it's kind of this point where everyone comes together. And so I think like that's a super crucial moment, especially for fashion brands, to have that alignment, because then everyone kind of like moves and goes and makes decisions from there. So that's like where I start, is like getting that alignment across like these kind of key either roles or departments around product. And so it's like what products that like we're trying to create that are aligned with the identity. And then starting from there, we kind of have this framework and these guidelines that we're going for. And then we go to each like role and department and figure out, okay, so for design, like how do we integrate technology to get us closer and closer to making these like iconic, ideal products, aligned products. And so going to, and then learning, figuring out what's the best tool, and then implementing it across the design and development process, basically.
Fantastic description there. My tip on this is going to be, I've already put it in the comments before the webcast. If anyone is looking, there is a free brand strategy that I create using an AI tool that I've developed. And essentially, if you give me website, LinkedIn profile, whatever information you give me, we can utilize AI to create you a brand strategy for free in seconds. So if you just want to follow the link, it's in the LinkedIn comments at linkedin.com, organization distributed republic. you'll be able to see there's a free brand strategy link. Literally, it's one of the tools that I developed because when I have conversations with people, it's one of the most sought after things that people want as small enterprises, medium enterprises, that nobody really has the resources to be able to do. And I think that for me was a really useful tool for being able to understand brand voice, being able to understand perception, and also something for people to be able to challenge as well. If I'm having a conversation with people related on these topics, then what I always want to be able to do is go, well, this is what I've come up with from an AI perspective. What things do you like? What things would you tweak? How can we make sure that that's closer aligned to what you were hoping for? So in that link as well, there's also your link to all your socials as well.
Yeah, and also adding on like the tool you mentioned. So yeah, it was really cool to like see how it worked with mine. And something that is also interesting is that it shows maybe like what you it reflects what you've put in, right? Like, so it reflects like if it is aligned, it reflects if it is like what you want it to be. So it's like I'm right now going through my own change of digital identity. So just wait, the result will be like quite shocking. So get ready, get excited. But yeah, like for me when doing it, it let me see, okay, like this feels aligned to where I want to go. This feels like more, I want to adjust it and change it. So yeah, for me, it was like especially helpful in that way as I'm kind of pivoting and like aligning and refocusing.
Definitely. AI is just a mirror. It only reflects the information and data we put into it. And that's why it's really useful for being able to have a document like that while using AI tools as well. Because what you can do is you train your AI on that brand strategy to make sure that you are getting that consistency of message and tone and brand coming across. So yeah, we looked at being able to look at your website, what's being communicated at the moment, and hold up, mirror up and go, is this the reflection you were hoping for? But you say there's drastic things in place. So I'm looking forward to looking at these changes, Lauren, and see what happens next. I'll keep it a secret for now, but I'm looking forward to what it might be. Cool. So thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us once again. Thank everyone from an audience who we've had to being able to join as well. If you're interested in this or you'd like to kind of look at being a guest or anything like that, go to www.distributedrepublic.xyz. And if you're curious about how your organization can implement some of these technologies and changes, you can get in contact with me at Jamie Bykov-Brett as my handle, and with Lauren at Kalulu Corp. So once again, any closing messages before we wrap up, Lauren?
Yeah, because I am shifting my identity, I forgot to mention that you can just look up my name, Lauren Kacher. I'm in the process of shifting the handles. And then if you're a fashion brand, if you have a studio or you're like an independent designer, I'm currently about to launch an accelerator program. So I'm speaking with brands, also like just to hear your challenges and better understand how we can integrate that into the solution. And also, if you're like a tech supplier, if you have like a tech solution that you think would be really applicable and helpful to fashion brands, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn, and I would love to have a conversation. And so yeah, also for the kind of digital studio accelerator, I'll be hosting a free workshop on September 5th. Is like the next one. We had one already that was quite successful turnout, about like I think 30 people, and so now I'll be hosting another one on the 5th of September, which can be found on my Linktree for the registration.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, insights, and participation, Lauren. And I shall catch everybody here very soon. So thank you so much, and speak to you all.